vedo che l'avete già fatto, quindi quello va benissimo. Vi ringrazio. La lezione dovrebbe già essere in streaming, quindi direi che possiamo iniziare dando il benvenuto al professor Matteo Cerri, ricercatore confermato presso il Dipartimento di Scienze Biomediche e Neuromotorie. Il professore quindi insegna fisiologia, studenti di medicina e ingegneria biomedica all'Università di Bologna, ovviamente. Il professore è un tutor storico del Collegio Superiore e nel corso degli anni ha tenuto diversi corsi e seminari sia di ambito biomedico ma anche di carattere interdisciplinare, che è la particolarità un po' della nostra scuola. E di questa categoria fa parte anche il seminario sul dibattito competitivo, dal quale poi è nata la nostra Debate Society, che al momento stiamo cercando di ampliare ed estendere a tutta l'università. Il professore è medico, dottore di ricerca in neurofisiologia, membro del Tropical Team Hibernation dell'Agenzia Spaziale Europea, dell'ESA, associato all'Istituto Nazionale di Fisica Nucleare, membro del direttivo nazionale della Società Italiana di Neuroetica. E oltre a tutta questa attività scientifica e didattica, il professore ha anche un'intensa attività divulgativa, attraverso numerose conferenze, tra cui anche alcune TED Talk, che ha tenuto in Italia e all'estero, e a mezzi divulgativi più innovativi come il podcast Elevatore di Pensiero, che potete cercare su Telegram e potete scrivere. Negli ultimi anni il professore ha anche pubblicato 2 libri per il pubblico generale, A mente fredda, uscito presso la Zanichelli, e La cura del freddo, uscito presso Inaudi, e che sono delle ottime letture estive anche con questo caldo. La lezione di oggi, dal titolo Towards Human Hibernation, from being killed by cold weather to being safe on a space travel, si svolgerà in lingua inglese. E le domande e gli interventi alla fine potranno essere fatti in italiano o inglese, come preferite. E se qualcuno avesse particolari problemi a comprendere, diciamo, l'inglese, lo può scrivere, e il professore potrebbe anche fare la lezione in italiano. Tuttavia, diciamo che a volte nel mondo universitario capita anche di avere lezioni in inglese, quindi, e anzi capita sempre di più, quindi sarebbe un bel allenamento provare comunque a seguire la lezione anche in lingua originale. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Professor Matteo Cerri.
Well, thank you very much. Grazie a tutti, a little bit in Italian, a little bit in English at the beginning. Quando dice un tutore storico vuol dire un tutore vecchio, questo è purtroppo la triste realtà. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, which I hope should be starting soon. And all right, so yes, I was asked to deliver this talk in English, and the first thing I apologize for with any English native speaker. I have a strong accent, I've been told. So if there is anything you don't understand, or if you'd like me to repeat or go more in detail, just ask me and let me know. I'm not sure I'm seeing any chat here, so moderator, please let me know if someone is asking any question. You can, of course, interrupt anytime. Don't worry. I'm pretty happy to have interacting chat and interactive talk. And we're going to talk today, this morning, to something we would actually like to do right now, since it's still kind of summertime early, and maybe you just got out of bed, and the coffee still is to run through your brain. And we talk about human hibernation, or hibernation in general. So what it is, and where it comes from, what can we do with it? So when we talk about hibernation, you may think of something that is related to space, like how do we travel in space? And I'm sure you can recognize many of these like movie frames. Those are blockbuster movie, most of them cult movie. You can challenge your skill in movie knowledge and try to understand it. I can, of course, unveil the secret at the end, or even now. But this is how science fiction envision hibernation. So usually there's a capsule, there's someone inside, and hibernation is used for multiple reasons. You can travel through long distance in space and go very far, letting your body to pretty much standing still in time through time, or you can travel in time. You can hibernate and then the time pass and then you wake up hundreds of years later or whatever, and then you're in the future. Or you could also hibernate to live in a like in a digital reality, in a wonder world, and your body is prevented from decay when your brain lives in virtual reality and you can do whatever it wants. So those are usually the reason director picked this kind of technology. Without hibernation, many science fiction movie couldn't be hold in terms of the storyline. You would have plenty of holes and irrational event. You couldn't travel to another solar system, for instance. And pretty much every director or every screenwriter sees hibernation with multiple commonalities. So they say capsule is a common thing, and often there is a liquid or a fluid that surround the body. Often also astronauts are kind of naked in the capsule, which is also something that doesn't make much sense, but it may be more for cinematographic reason and to show the actual body. One movie among the 6 that I show you here is kind of maybe a little more what it could be. As you see in many capsules, you can see the body inside, and that's also something that there's no reason for. But one movie, this one, actually covers also the face, which is very relevant. The one thing that no movie gets it right is how you wake up. That's usually happen in a moment. So you push a button and astronauts wake up. No, that will take a long time. And but so we're still far ahead from this technology. But that's the way we're moving forward. So as also you can think from the name, hibernation is based in cold. So cold is supposedly the heart of hibernation. And cold, as a long story, the relationship between humans and cold is it goes way back. And now we're gonna see pretty much how cold was a killer for us. Cold is one of the greatest natural enemy that we have faced in our history. And now we learn how to harvest this power and potentially making a travel mate or an assistant. So we're gonna go through this ideal work, and we'll see the cold as an enemy, as a killer, then how it became a cure, a therapy, how medicine was starting to understand there was something in cold that could be used, and then how we're gonna make it a hope. So why an enemy? Well, if you happen to be exposed to the environment in a cold environment, then your body may not react very well. We're not very well equipped as a species to deal with cold. And we don't have fur. We are the only primate that is a hairless skin. And we lost our hairless skin when we left the forest to go to in the savannah. At that point, we didn't have the shade from the trees, so we have to help to dissipate more heat. We were exposed to the sun, therefore to dissipate more heat, we wanted to lose our hair on the body surface in order to exchange more heat with the environment. And it's not a chance, it's not random that the only place we don't have hairless skin, so we still have hair, is on our head, where the sun is actually hitting from above, and we wanted to protect our head from direct sunlight exposure. On the rest, we want to dissipate heat. But for this reason, we're not very good at cold defense. And what happens when you get cold? Well, when you get cold, your body triggers an enormous defense. So we try to fight cold with all our body. The first thing is we're going to increase metabolic rate. Metabolic rate it's the amount of energy that we use to stay alive, in a matter of speaking. We could also change and substitute, replace metabolic rate with the term oxygen consumption. It's not exactly the same, but for our purpose, it will work fine. So how much energy do we use to produce, to maintain our physiological activity working? And immediately, if our body get colder, metabolic rate and oxygen consumption skyrockets. That's because that makes heat. Every biochemical reaction will produce heat. There are specific biochemical reactions that are designed to produce heat in the mitochondria. Those reactions use a specific proteins called uncoupling protein, which pretty much decouple the making of ATP from the heat that is generated in this process. So all the energy that is consumed by oxidating substrate will go into generating heat and not into making ATP. But we do it in many other ways, even shivering, there's all sorts of reaction. So if this doesn't work, this is a mainline on defense, increasing the gasoline consumption. If this doesn't work, then we switch to a different defense. The other defense is, okay, there is no way we can fight this cold. Let's just wait. Let's just hope someone is coming to rescue. Let's just gain time. That's the other strategy. And so our consciousness start to decline, respiration decrease, metabolic rate decrease. At this point, it's not make sense to use more energy. Actually, we need to use less energy. So slowly, metabolic rate goes below normal. At a certain point, we start experiencing some issue with our heart, especially, which is not very happy to beat in the cold. So the rhythm start getting shallower and not very rhythmic, as we says, we lose sinus rhythm, and maybe at a later stage, the heart may stop beating, and that's it, pretty much. Even we see that that's not truly, that's part of it. So this is what happened when we get cold. It's accidental hypothermia. So if you are an experienced mountaineers, you probably have known someone that was victim of accidental hypothermia, maybe under an avalanche or something. One interesting description of what happened when you die by cold exposure is in a little story by Andersen, in which I'm sure you remember that story when you were a kid. Eventually, this little girl who sells matches, and she has this magic 3 matches, and so she's very poor. She's in the very cold in the outside, try to make some money selling her matches, and she light one of the matches. And what happened in the first match? She feels she see a nice chimney, and there's a fireplace, and it's all warm. And the first match, and it's a wish to be warm. Well, that is also the body reaction. When we give up our defense, when we decide, or our body decide, our brain decide, okay, no more increase in metabolic rate. What happened is that giving up the blood that we were keeping so secretly holding in our core to avoid dissipating heat, actually goes back to our hands, to our face. And this is like a flash of blood, which makes us feel warm. It's often reported that people who die from cold exposure may actually be found with their clothes off, taking their clothes off, because they're warm at the end. It's like, okay, if we know we're going to die, let's die comfortably somehow. You can even think it that way. So she dreams this fireplace and the heat coming. Second, then she likes the second matches, and she has the vision of this giant table with plenty of food and all sorts of goods. Why? Because her body's been depleted of energy, and actually she would like to have more energy to burn and to increase the metabolic rate. Now, when we are giving up our metabolic rate response, it's mostly because our body feels there is no more energy to burn. We're running out of gas. And third and last matches, she has a fully psychotic event. She dreams of her grandmother that comes to pick her up and take her to heaven. So it's a slow, if you want to call it, it's a sweet death. Actually, it's a silent death that slowly takes you to the other place without you actually really realizing. But beside literature, many people have died of cold exposure. For instance, at sea, for salesmen, this is a well-known event, and I picked a picture of Leo DiCaprio here in Titanic as an example for every sailman who died at sea. And that's because water conduct heat much more than air, and so heat leaves our body much faster than when we are just air exposed. So we definitely don't have enough energy to burn if we are in cold water to maintain ourselves warm enough. During the Second World War, in the English Channel, for aviators that were gunned down in the sea, average life expectancy was about 4 to 5 minutes for the coldness of the water. Of course, we all know that Leo DiCaprio had a good chance to survive here. You could just run on this door. There was space for both. We all know that, but anyway, Cameron want to give us a sad hand, so that's fine. It's still in the director's power to make people, an actor, die or live as he wants, as he please. Mountaineers, as we were saying, mountaineers is another category that has that die for exposure pretty often. This is a famous picture. It was a few months ago. It's a line of people going up to Mount Everest, and it was a bit of a scandal. Like, okay, Mount Everest should be one of the most inaccessible places on the planet. Actually, it's kind of easy to go on Mount Everest. You don't have to be a skilled mountaineer, and it's just a walk in high altitude. But that's the only difficulty. So you're gonna pretty much be at the same altitude where airplane fly. So there is no very much oxygen, actually about 25% of what we experienced in here. And if you were to be teletransported from your chair now to the top of Mount Everest, then you'll die probably in about 20 minutes because you're not adapted to live in that little amount of oxygen. So you have to adapt to that condition. But we see Mount Everest is a natural laboratory for what we're interested in. And there are some special cases that happen there we'll discuss later. But so far, what we're interested is that a lot of people die on Mount Everest. About 20% of the people who go there, try to have a holiday there, die for the harsh condition of the mountain. So I always said to my friend, if you considering taking a holiday on Mount Everest with your friends, be sure to pick the right friends, because 2 of them will not come back if you're going there with 10 of your friends. So it's a risky vacation. And most of the people who die on Mount Everest die on the last 1,000 meters. Here is a map of people dead on Mount Everest. Mount Everest is pretty much an open sky cemetery now. And there's plenty of dead body up there. No one cleans them. And you see Sherpas, which are much more used to the environment, mostly die at lower altitude. And that is because they die in accident, maybe avalanche or taking equipment up to higher quota, falling down. So there are different reasons. But most of the tourists and mountaineers, they die on the last 1,000 meters, which is the so-called death zone. There's a death zone because it will kill you no matter what. That means that even if you're adapted, if you were sitting on a chair in the death zone and not doing anything, watching Netflix, you'll die in any way. Your body doesn't have enough to survive with that little amount of oxygen. So cell replication stops, and so your body doesn't renew anymore, and then you can just wait to die. So it just takes a matter of time, how long it will take, but you will die no matter what. That's why mountaineers need to go up to the Mount of Everest, to summit Everest, within 24 hours usually. So they live just a little below the 8,000 meter line, and then within 24 hours they have to go up and down. Otherwise, they are dead most of the time. Other people that experience cold as a killer are in the military. The military is they very well known the danger the cold is for them. Alexander the Great, himself risked or die a couple of times from cold exposure. Hannibal lost pretty much 50% of his troop, going through the Alps. That's not commonly reported in a history book. And of course, we're fascinated with the adventure of carrying the elephants across the Alps. That's something difficult, but it came at a high price. He lost a lot of his army doing that by exposure. Napoleon is probably the one you all remember, lost a great deal of his army in the Russian campaign due to cold. George Washington as well, during the Philadelphia siege, he lost thousands of people by cold exposure. In the First World War, about 233,000 people are estimated to have been dead, to die by cold exposure. And in the Second World War, this number is just, you can just reach it on the west front, on the west part of the war. Our army itself, the Italian army, had some issue with it. In the summer of 1915, Mussolini decided he wanted to be part of the Hitler's venture conquering France, and so he wanted to attack France. And he was a bit skeptical because while the Wehrmacht and the Germans had pretty much destroyed the entire French defense up north, actually the southern part, the Alpine troop, they were untouched by fight yet. But the peace talk were already be conducted when our Mussolini decided to attack in any way. So we attacked the backstab to the French army, and we attacked in June in the Western Alp front. And it's a sad story because since it was June, our army was equipped with summer equipment, which means short sleeve and uniform and short pants, and the shoes were for summer. But the theater of the fighting was about at 3,000 meters of altitude. So we had 10 times more people dying for cold exposure than for the fight, and we lost about. Actually, that's a proportion is not right, about 50%. So we lost about, if I remember, around between 2,000 and 3,000 soldiers in a couple of day fight, while the French lost 70 or 80. And half of those were for cold exposure. So we had a first-hand experience of what the cold can do. Then, of course, explorer had cold as a natural enemy. This is Ernest Shackleton in Antarctica, 1909. This is the Endurance expedition. It's a super famous expedition, one of the most adventures that you can find. They had so many problems. Shackleton was a maverick, you could say. He wanted to go to Antarctica and be the first one to cross it by walking from one way to the other. And so he needed a crew. In the port of Plymouth, he just put out an advertisement saying, "Hey, you don't have much in your life. You're not married. No one wants you. Your life is just crap. And then, yes, come with me and we go to Antarctica." And surprisingly, he got enough people to run an expedition. But down there, their shipwreck and their tent was taken away. They had to eat the dogs. It was a surprising adventure. They resilient. Actually, endurance was truly the name of this expedition. They survived with incredible event. And finally, it took 2 years from them to come back to England, and this made the legend of this expedition. I highly recommend you read the story if you're inclined to this kind of adventure. It's not the only one, of course. The French also went to the Antarctica. Those are Bourdon Plenum. This is a night photo that I really like because it was taken on July 4th. So it is on the Bastille Day in France, and I can envision Plenum say the good thing we had champagne in the Champagne ice, because of course they are on the Atlantic shelf here. In Europe, the coldest experience, let's say the one that went down to legend, was the winter of 1916, 1917. And I can give you, if it works, first-hand experience. This is one of the witness of this of the winter. It was First World War. So we are in the fight, and this is a British soldier who is telling the story of how the winter was a problem for them and how cold it was. So I'm going to let them start and see if it works. Let me know if you don't hear anything. Anyway, the words will come up the screen.
The coldest winter was the winter of 1916-17. The winter was so cold that I felt like crying. In fact, the only time I didn't actually cry, but I never felt like it before, not even under shellfire. We were in the Ypres salient, and in the front line I can remember we weren't allowed to have a brazier because we weren't far away from the enemy, and therefore we couldn't brew up tea, but we used to have tea sent up to us up the communication trench. Well, a communication trench can be as much as 3/4 of a mile long. And it used to start off in a huge Dixie, 2 men would carry it sort of like a stretcher. It would start off boiling hot. By the time it got to us in the front line, there was ice on the top. It was so cold.
So it was so cold that even the tea for a British soldier that was being carried in this giant container and on a stretcher for about a kilometer, and it was starting boiling hot and was arriving with ice on top. So that winter was so cold, the German had to go back and use, they remember as their Steckruben winter, and the Steckruben are those horseradish that are bearably eatable. So the taste of the horseradish is considered to be distasteful and something gross. But they had to eat those because potatoes died. So it was so cold that potato couldn't grow. And so still Germans, the older Germans, remember this winter as one of the harshest of their life. I'm not sure there's anyone still alive now that can tell the story, but until a few decades ago, that was it. So that was very cold. And as we said before, one of the iconic events of cold killing is Napoleon and the Russian campaign. But in the Russian campaign, something else happened. So Napoleon was a great general, and as any great general, his greatness was just not in the tactics. So he was a great tactician, of course, and you need to win a battle. And then when the battle is fought, you need to know how you move your pieces like a chess player. But to be positioned to win a battle, to apply your tactical genius, you need to have a great logistic. You need to be placed in the right position before the battle starts. You need to have the right support for the soldier, to have them moving faster, to be well treated and well fed and ready to combat, better ready to combat than the opposite front. And so it was great in that. And many inventions came with Napoleon, like ambulance, for instance. Camp hospital, all this health part of the Napoleonic army was like a giant leap forward in terms of new invention and new tactics. So all this for saying that the French doctors, they were pretty advanced at their time. Also, not just in practicing medicine, which was still the one at the time, but in observing and monitoring what was going on and to try to understand. And they were noticing something very interesting in Russia. They said that some people looked like they were dead, but they weren't dead, actually. And surprisingly, they were able to come back to life somehow. And also, they noticed something else very interesting. They, after the battle started and ends, and then there is a small truce, and they can send they had this ambulance with horses. They were going on the battlefield to catch up the injured. Previous time, if you were injured on a battlefield, maybe a sword or something, pretty much you were dying sooner or later, infection, something else. No one would care about you. Just no waste of time. They will start doing triage, so seeing which soldier could be brought back to camp and actually taken care of so they could fight another day. So what happened if you are injured on a battlefield? That you can come back on the ambulance on your base, and you're going to go into different places according to your rank. You know, if you're an officer, you go to the officer quarter. If you're a soldier, you go on the soldier quarter. Napoleonic army was kind of, we could call it democratic today in some broad sense, meaning that you could actually raise to higher rank even starting from the battle line. But there are still a difference. If you were an officer, you weren't a soldier. So what did the doctor notice? That soldiers were surviving in good numbers, while officers were dying like flies. And what was the difference? Why officers were dying and soldiers weren't? And the main difference they realized was that the officer quarter was warm. It was maintained warm to be more comfortable, and it was supposed to be good. While the officer camp was just a tent, and it was cold. So somehow the cold was having an effect. Somehow the cold was helping the injured people to survive longer. And they were interested in this experience. They even changed what is the definition of death on the battlefield kind of in a funny way. So they in their book, especially this book with Maurice Beaupré, who wrote the first book about the actual therapeutic property of the cold, it was used to say, if the body is decomposing, if it's rotting, okay, then the soldier is dead. And also if his head is about an alpha meter from their body, is detached, then also dead. But in any other case, watch carefully. It's kind of the root of what now is commonly said in intensive care, that you're not dead until you're warm and dead. Now, if you're cold and dead, then still some hope is lying around. So this will take us to the next session, which is the cure. How do we use cold for a cure? It's a long story. Go back down to Imhotep, Egyptian major kind of bishop, and that said that when you have to operate on the brain, Egyptian were drilling hole in the brain, it's better if the patient is cold. And then to historical cases like Hannah Green, which was a British woman. She was charged and sentenced to death because of the killing of her two children. And what happened? She was hanged. So we're in the 1600s, one of the coldest day in England, in London, in winter. Hanging happened in the morning. So usually when you die by hanging, you die because your body drops from a high, and the rope will stop the falling abruptly, and your neck will displace one of the cervical vertebrae, and then will sever your your brainstem, and then you die. But if that doesn't happen, if you're not fast enough, especially if the rope, for instance, is a little shorter than it's supposed to be, then you won't die for the reason. Then you just hang there and slowly being strangled. And that was happening to Anna Green. So she didn't die immediately. She was left there strangling and hanging, and her family was there. You could assist to the death sentence of one of your relatives. They were trying to help her, taking her and kind of let her jump and pushing up in the air, and so she could fall back and finally break his neck. So the family help is kind of, yes, they are helping in a way. So careful also your family. But to make it short, what happened, that after a while, then she looked like she was dead. And at the time, medical students that were, if you weren't very good, if your professor was upset at you, you were you were punished by go to the place where people were hanged and taking their body and do maybe some kind of autopsy or looking at the dead body. It was supposed to be a disgraceful operation. So they shouldn't take the body to their hospital. She is dead. They open, they do whatever they get to a certain point. They start to touching the body, and they realize she's still alive. So she's breathing. They don't know what to do. call what would be their head, and then the chief of police come, and then the judge. And the judge says, well, she was guilty. She was sentenced to that. And the procedure was executed. So, and she hung for 30 minutes, which what the law require. And she survived, and that's it. Good for us. And she was free to go. And she lived other, I think, 15 years after that. So it was cold and slowly strangling part of her survival. Could have been. But the story goes forward, and then there are other scientists that slowly, take this carry on. John Hunter was the figure that inspired Dr. Dolittle, took a great interest in exploring what the cold can do to animal and how animals die of cold. And he was thinking that cold, actually he was thinking that heat was the life force, that if we could take heat from one source and transplant it into another, we could pretty much, reach kind of eternal life or defeat death. And this is a story that another illustrious fellow, we could say, Giovanni Aldini, was taking a step forward. So Giovanni Aldini was the grandson, the nephew actually, of Galvani. And he was excited by electricity and bioelectricity. And he thought in his career, he did a lot of things. He tested on himself, electrical machine, tried to use electricity to cure depression. So he had he's an adventurous medical career, let's say. But he thought that he had what John Hunter didn't have, the understanding that, yes, heat is the soul. You could transfer it and you could need it, but you need to kind of put it in motion. You need a trigger, and electricity is the trigger. That's what it is. So he tried a very famous experiment in London in 1802, in which he tried to revive a body, a dead body, dead from hanging. Of course, that's where the guinea pig at the time. And he did this, at this experiment, you imagine there were present, there was royalty, the parents of the kings were there, doctors, all the high-ranking British men, the Londoners at the time were there. It was so great a fun event that the day after the Time had an entire page, telling the story. And what happened in this demonstration experiment, Aldini attaches his electrical machine to this dead body, start sending current, and the body reacts to the current. Of course, you move an arm, then the other arm, then even start raising up his torso. The eyes open. That the people were freaking out when they see that, and it really looked like there was just a tiny bit to come back to life. It tried to make his heart beating again, but at the end, of course, it didn't work. But that had a great impression on the people at the time. So it looked like you could preserve the body, and then maybe there was just some little thing in the procedure that didn't go right, but you could eventually make it back to life. And if you think this story is something you already heard of, it's because you already heard of, because there was a little young lady at the time who was about 5 and who lived in this environment in London. There was a dear friend and her father assisted this experiment. And this young lady is nothing else than Mary Shelley, who went to write the history of Frankenstein. And Dr. Frankenstein is pretty much what Aldini tried to do at the time. And in the book story is successful, of course, but that is the influence that the story had on the time. The thing when more forward and more scientific, you say Temple Fay is the father of neurosurgery and therapeutic hypothermia, if you want to call it the way. The man who broke the cold barrier is called. He was schooling patients to try to cure cancer, and this is a new treatment that we see he has some interesting is interesting for us today to be revised in a different way. Temple Fay started work on cancer because he noticed that body parts that are the colder are less affected by cancer. We usually have cancer in organs that are warm, but rarely we have cancer in the hand, for instance, or in the feet. His treatment didn't work at the time, but it was part of a world in which hibernation cured. This is a newspaper in 1939 in Chicago. Hibernation cure, you can say, was something, it was already proposed, for different cancer, and refrigeration was supposed to be a therapy. Temple Fay works, it was a great achievement for medicine. Also great was the starting point of one of the darkest pages of medicine. How he worked on his therapeutic hypothermia idea at the end of the 30s, and then he submitted his research to an European journal. At the time, European journals were the top in medicine, and in Belgium. And unfortunately, shortly before that, the German took over Belgium and the Second World War. And since the Germans were very thorough, and they had the problem of aviators and pilots dying by cold exposure, especially when they were gunned down in the sea, in the North Sea. They start what is an infamous page for medicine. So the experiment, the so-called cold experiment, or experiment of hypothermia in the cow. And this is a sad page for medicine. Had been generating a lot of discussion too, because it's the only Nazi experiment that has been somehow challenging the idea that there may be something interesting in scientific terms. That it was maybe the only experiment that you could say, well, maybe there is something that we should look at this data. And the data were secret for a long time, and especially out of respect of the victim. A paper on the New England Journal of Medicine came out, which an American doctor, had the opportunity to look at the data, at the original data. And the conclusion was that they were not truly experiments. They were just random attempt to do something with cold exposure, having people die in different conditions. So we can still put this in the category of torture more than of science. But it was, I think, a good thing to have a deep look at that. Then there are other cases, even more surprising. Dr. Hannah Bagelholm, the coldest woman alive, as she is supposed to be, died no, she didn't die. Was in an accident, cross-country ski, and she fell her head underwater for about an hour. Head in a mountain in Norway, and feet up, and their friends couldn't be able to pull it up for them. An helicopter rescue team has to come in, and when they finally were able to extract her from the river, her body temperature was 13.8, heart's not beating, heart didn't beat for a long time. They took her to an hospital with a chopper, and slowly attached it to a lung heart machine, slowly rewarming it, took hours. Then the heart started beating again. Then she entered a coma. Then after 2 weeks, she aroused and she wakes up from the coma. She's barely able to move. Took 6 months of therapy to have her still on her feet. But now she's perfectly normal. She's a doctor, she's a radiologist, she works in a hospital, she does exactly the same life as she did before. And she has been dead for hours. So those are all interesting cases, because for all you can think you can't die if you're not alive. That is the secret of what cold as a treatment can do. And in the oldest day, you could do this with ice, and now you can do it with more sophisticated technology, but it is the same kind of thing. Cool the body to try to save time. That is because there is a relationship between temperature, life, and time. It's quite sophisticated, so I'm just going to brush the surface of this topic, but there is a linear relationship between metabolic rate and mass in terms of absolute value, like an elephant uses more energy than a mouse, and it is inverse in terms of units. So a gram of mouse will use way more energy than a gram of elephant. And this also correlate, is the same relation that you can find between heart rate, the number of beats your heart has at the minute, which is another way to look at metabolic rate, strongly correlated with metabolic rate, and life expectancy, meaning that the faster your heart beat, the shorter your life is going to be. That's on a grand scale of different animals. You're just looking at mammals in this case. That means that if you multiply heart rate for life expectancy, you get roughly, with big error, but more or less roughly, the same number of heartbeats for life, meaning that you get a certain amount of heartbeats. It doesn't mean that your heart has the next number of heartbeat that you can do and then you'll die. It means that you can run through biological time a different speed and to run faster through biological time, your hearts need to beat faster. So that is the relationship that your interest. And that's why therapeutic hypothermia, lowering metabolic rate and lowering heartbeat, is supposed to gain you time. So hypothermia reduces metabolic rate. And that's why we cool the body to induce hypothermia. But the body reacts, increasing metabolic rate. And that is the opposite of what we want to obtain. So metabolic rate in therapeutic hypothermia is something we still not control completely. And that's why we push our research further in what is hope to be able to do this, to go to space, but also to do something else. And that's why we use and we experience research in hibernation. So what is hibernation truly? Well, it's something that many mammals can do. Is a state where we call it suspended animation, you could say. Like your body goes into a standby, really. It was something known in the past. Spallanzani, who is an illustrious Italian physiologist, wrote 150 pages on his lab journal on hibernation. He was working and experiencing with marmots and bats, and he was fascinated by the fact that you could put bats in a jar and taking oxygen, the air out of them, and they will die, of course. But if you were taking a hibernating bat and putting in the jar and taking the air out, they wouldn't die. So he was trying to understand how this was working. And there are also interesting stories about hibernation. This is the little town of Pskov in Russia in 1900, in the British Medical Journals, which is a prestigious journal still on today. This little anonymous report on human hibernation come out and saying that in the city town of Pskov, people in the winter were used to gather together in a giant kind of big house in the center of the village, not to stand together. It's a very poor town, very cold during winter in Russia. They had single room for people, and they were, it's a literature, they were entering those little rooms, those little cells, and they were sleeping the winter off. They were waking up in spring. Nothing confirmed. It's just a report, but it's nice to repeat that. So what is hibernation truly? Well, I can show you what is not. And this is what some of us usually think hibernation is when you heard the word. This is a frozen fish was taken out of a refrigerator. We are in a giant fish market in in the far East Asia. You can find this and many other video on YouTube, which is a fantastic source of weird phenomena. So we see this fish was then put in this room temperature water, pretty much, where there is another of his species trolling around, looking pretty much uninterested in everything that happened to him. But we'll see what's going on here. He's swimming, and now we can even see the shoes of these two gentlemen. I assuming this is the seller and this is the buyer, judging on the different color and shape of the shoe. But something happening now. Someone pointing out, look at the fish, look. And maybe if you're looking careful, you already seen something very different. That how was the fish before? Remember, it was frozen. Now it's kind of defrosting, but it's more than defrosting. It's moving, it's bubbling, and it's getting back to life. So this is not hibernation. That I want to show this because it's a fantastic event. There are other species that can do this. And don't go back to your refrigerator trying to unfrozen your frozen fish, I call it. Fish sticks, anyway, because they won't come back to life. But this is not hibernation. What hibernation? This is cryonics, pretty much, and that's an entirely different thing. What hibernation is what bears and squirrels and lemurs and those weird animals called tenrec, they do in winter to survive a period with no resources. They do something very special. They do the opposite of what therapeutic hypothermia is. This is a marmot of the Alps. This is an hypothermic torpor bout. Torpor is the technical word we use for hibernation. And what happens? This is the body temperature of the marmots. You can see that this is normal, about 37. This is hibernating in torpor, about 12. This is ambient temperature, a few degrees lower. But the main event of hibernation is what happened in the gray area. So this is metabolic rate. Metabolic rate here drops about 95%, 98%. And therefore, after temperature also drop. It's exactly the opposite of what we've seen at the beginning. So these animals are able to turn their heat engine off, and therefore they're cooling down. The cooling happens as a consequence, and of course helps to decrease metabolic rate even further, but it's not the tool the animal use to have a metabolic suppression. So this is an important difference between therapeutic hypothermia and hibernation. And if you could use hibernation as therapeutic hypothermia, that would increase enormously the potential of this treatment. And it comes from a long way up in the past, this fantastic behavior. How did evolution of torpor work? Well, we are mammals. We are condemned to live in a shorter range and a narrow range of body temperature. Before us, we have to consider reptiles. They have a very large range of temperature they can live. They have an optimal temperature, but they cannot reach it by themselves. That's why you see lizard in the morning to just stay in the sun and get warm. Why they have to do this? Because the sun helps them to reach the optimal temperature for the brain and for the muscle to be an effective predator and to escape for predation. We don't have to do this. That's our magic power. This is the greatest power the mammals have. I think the truly driver of mammal supremacy, if you want to call it like this. And it comes from a long way in the past. So this is what happened a long time ago when we had to deal with dinosaurs and mammals were using their secret power. So in a time in which mammals appear, dinosaurs are ruling the planet. And they are daily animals. Pretty much they don't see very well in the dark. And they cannot really thermoregulate. So mammals start using their power, their higher metabolic rate, which is about 7-8 times the one of reptiles, to live at night. Why? To escape predation, one thing. So you ran away from your dinosaurs and you can eat in the forest and try to survive. Of course, having a high metabolic rate and having this power to be warmer always, all the time, as it requires you to feed often. You need to get a huge amount of food to survive. If you think of a reptile, they eat once in a while. Mammals have to eat all the time. So at a certain point, how do we balance this energy expenditure? Well, so we eat as much as we can in the night, but when we come back in the day in our nest, we can't just sleep. Sleep is not enough of energy saving for us. So we have to enter torpor. We have to suppress metabolic rate. We do a metabolic austerity in that time to sort of save all that we can. And dinosaurs, they realize we are there. And especially not a T-Rex, but smaller dinosaurs like the Velociraptor, the mini raptor, even the Microraptor, they want to hunt us because we're good food. We're even warm food for them. So they develop their strategy. Their strategy is to not produce heat. They cannot produce heat to go in the night. They try to save them from the day. That's why they develop protofeathers. Protofeathers were used to save heat and being able to hunt us in the night. So for about 100 million of years, we have been living in this arm race, a metabolic arm race. We were trying to produce more heat and save it during the day, as dinosaurs were trying to save it during the day to use it at night. Then finally, the dinosaurs were extincted by our asteroid that came and destroyed all the dinosaurs' life on the planet. Say a nice cheer to them. And we were able to finally live during the day and replicate it. At that point, we didn't even have to hibernate anymore because there were no predation. And if there's ever been a heaven on our planet, that was it. 65 million years ago, a few million years later, where there were only plenty of resources for mammals to use in every possible place on the planet. And so we go back to water, high mountain, Arctics, and we just replicate. And going to hibernation is losing time at the moment. So we went from a metabolic austerity to a metabolic anarcho-capitalism, you could say. And that takes us to our day. And if you look at all the mammals at the moment, and if you mark with the color mark the ones that go into hibernation, you see they are all widespread to all the family of mammals, which means that the gene set that is required to enter torpor and hibernation was common in our ancestor. And our ancestor here, the proto-mammal, was an hibernator. So the question at this point would be, can humans enter hibernation? Well, we can, as a fetus, we are born into hibernation. Then there are rare cases of diseases like this in which humans enter hibernation, something that really resembles hibernation, from a still unknown neurological disorder, sometimes called Shapiro syndrome, and that's not the only name. And during torpor, all you think in your body change. So all the system in your body adapt to this new condition. I don't have time to go into the detail of how the physiology changed, but brain change, synapses retracted, tau protein get expresses, the immune system is suppressing its activity in a very different way than what we could think. Microbiota and the guts also work differently. Muscle maintains strength, which is very interesting for space adventures. Kidney don't produce any urine anymore. There's no need, there's no metabolism, so no need for that. Cancer stopped growing. Remember, cancer was something that the Temple Fay was interested in. He had some deep insight in that. And of course, for space endeavors, hibernation gives you very high protection from radiation. So how you induce torpor in human? Well, in a similar way to what happened in nature, you could. Now, if you are in a cold environment, then your body will defend you, as we said, with all this weapon. And those weapons are controlled by your brain. So what happened is that we have understood how the brain controls metabolic expenditure and temperature, especially this critical area in the brainstem called raphe pallidus, which is controlled by a complicated network of hypothalamic nuclei. I'm not entering detail as well here. But to make it short, if you stop this circuit, preventing him from acting and kind of trick him pharmacologically to stop working, then you get an animal like a rat, which is an animal that doesn't enter torpor, is not able to. And then you can trick his brain and having enter hibernation. This is an infrared reading. This is an animal in hibernation, artificial hibernation, or synthetic torpor, as we call it, is represented. And when you stop your drugs delivery, it goes back to normal. This is what happened in terms of physiology, but that's if we can if you're interested. And you can ask, how do I feel? What does it feel like to be in torpor? Well, I try to find a way to show this in music. It's not ready, so I won't play it. But the idea was to use brain waves as music waves and transform somehow what the brain waves were encoding at the time, transform it into music, and having a play. Here, I was lucky enough to have Saturnino play some of these tunes. If any one of you is interested and know how to work with this stuff, because collaboration is always welcome. Finally, if I have still 5 minutes and then I can finish, yes, thank you. We'll take you very quick in the space adventure. So question is, who will develop a synthetic torpor technology that could revolutionize many things? And media is always interested in this. I've been lucky enough to be on many journals and be interviewed by many media, but I also work with the European Space Agency, collaborating with NASA when it happened on this topic. And all the space agencies are working on this. So why are we interested in hibernation and space? How could hibernation help you? Well, there are three main problems in space exploration. Let's say going to Mars, but even further. So first problem is food, that you don't have enough. Then you have psychosis coming, and then you have radiation. So imagine to be on a shared vessel, small vessel that takes 6 people, now actually probably 4 people is supposed to be on Mars, they require a lot of energy, a lot of food, 9 months going, 9 months coming back, let's say 2 years, 2 years and a half worth of food. Is like carrying about 2 to 3 elephants with you. That's require a lot of food in the space. Shipping something in space is about $60,000 per kilogram. And then you need to ship the food and build a bigger a bigger spaceship to hold the food. So that's very expensive. Plus you have psychosis, event that can hit you when you are deprived of privacy and staying from the same people for a long time. If you ever been on a kind of holiday, maybe sailing with your friend, then probably you were dreaming of killing them at night, because it's very hard to stay always together with the same people. And if you think I'm joking, last year in an Antarctic base, one scientist stabbed another scientist in the back because he was spoiling him the end of his thriller that he was reading. So people get very crazy in isolation, and there is nothing you can do if something like that happened between the Earth and Mars. And then you have radiation. Radiation in space is extremely dangerous. Is the one factor that limits our capacity of exploration in the solar system. You can calculate roughly, because it's difficult calculation, we don't have much experience on the kind of radiation that we have in space, or different from the one you can experience in an X-ray machine. But it limits effectively our distance, so we can go in space. And hibernation, if you could hibernate the crew, then you won't need that much food, because you don't eat and don't produce any waste in hibernation. You don't have the problem of psychosis, because you're not conscious most of the time. And final bonus, you have an effective way to protect your body from radiation, not an active shielding, which is very hard to make in space, but a biological shielding, which is actually very powerful. You think that this could take us to Mars, but this could take us to Europa, a travel that term of radiation is much more dangerous. So hibernation could be the perfect tool for space exploration. Is it a coincidence? As I said, I don't think so. And how much does that cost, really briefly? Well, science always has a cost. If you think of the Human Genome Project costing this red dot, you see the other scientific project, and it came out with a substantial cost. But what I always say is, how much is this in relative term compared to what we use or what we spend for other reasons? Well, this blue dot is what Avatar make the gross net profit of Avatar, just a movie that made more than a major science project. Or this is what people spend in alcohol in the United States in a year. So this is the kind of number we need to compare it. I wanted to put Veneto here, but it couldn't fit the entire frame. And this is the development of the F-35 fighter jets. So just to show you that it's not true that science is expensive. Science is actually very cheap, never been that cheaper in the history of the humanity. It's just where we want to put the money that we have. That's fine if you don't want to put it in science, it's just a choice, but we have to be honest in that choice. And science is also hard to do today. And if you are thinking of a career in science, you need to consider that our country especially, but not just our country, this is, I would say, it's a common thing, has put science in a weird spot. I kind of synthesized this with a meme, in which we scientists are pushing the carrier of knowledge. We want to push knowledge further. And we have someone that tried to help us. The bureaucracy wants to help us, but is put in the wrong position, because you can push a car if you're standing on it. So it's actually creating a problem. I understand that's not your intention, but that still is a problem. And our politicians don't realize that. They just watch something else. So if you're lucky enough, you have a powerful politician in your family, please let him know that we don't hate bureaucracy because of it. We hate bureaucracy because of where it's positioned and the obstacle that is for now to carry in science. And if this talk kind of a little interesting you, I had to tell you I cut many parts short, and we didn't talk about how actually animals survive freezing and what is cryonics and how Lazarus survived. It's possible that Lazarus was actually, or have one of those diseases that put you in spontaneous hibernation. Could you swim after having a meal? That's an old question that I will not answer this, but it is part of the cold, and you die because of the cold when that happens. But cold has also an effect on our mood. There's new technology for cooling people in surgical room. There is all other story in the literature that are related to cold, like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which was actually a friend of Mary Shelley. How the anti-frozen protein was discovered that this hasn't still won yet a Nobel Prize, but it should, and I will bet that it will win. Von Driers was the one who invented it, and what is cryotherapy, and even how a group of Australian creationists used hibernation to justify Noah's Ark. They were thinking that they couldn't understand how Noah was keeping lions and gazelle in the same boat, and so they have to rely on what a miracle. And there is something called the economics of miracle in this weird world that is creationism, in which you have to use miracles only when absolutely needed, otherwise you're doing a sin. And so they didn't want to use a miracle for Noah, and then they find out a colleague in Australia is studying this little animal, is a dwarf opossum, and can stay hibernate per year, 2 years. So they say that's it. That's how Noah did it. No, the animal were in hibernation. No need for God to send a magic sleep on them. So it's interesting to see creationism using science. And the story of the dead zone it has secrets, marvel in it, because 2 mountaineers, Beckweathers and Lincoln Horn, who were dead on the death zone in 1997 and 2005, they actually came back to life. And when I say they came back to life, I'm not saying they were like Anna Bagelholm, who was rescued and brought back to life by a team, by an hospital team. They by themselves came back to life. They were left for dead in a harsh condition. They spent 44 hours in the death zone, condition that would kill anyone. And they were able to survive. How they did, we are proposing that they enter torpor and they unlock actually hibernation, and they were able to enter hibernation and then wake up and arouse from that the day after. And it's a very interesting story. You may find part of this as it was already said in my last book. It was published right now. All the story I'll told in here, or in A Mente Fredda for Zanichelli, which is a bit eventually more technical, or on my podcast, which is rarely uploaded, but an episode a month or so I can publish. And I'm very happy and thankful for the time you gave me. I wish you can see this guy that was with us for the entire length of the talk. You can see a little bright dot there, and that the Earth. So what you're actually looking here is the sky from Mars. And I really wish some of you can one day potentially see it, since no one has ever witnessed in person. And good luck to every one of you, and thank you again for your attention, if you're still there.
Grazie al professor Cerri per questa bellissima lezione. E prima della prossima lezione, che è Caos, complessità e pensiero sistemico e le altre cose collegate di cui vale la pena parlare, del professor Francesco Gonella dell'Università Ca' Foscari, abbiamo tempo per un paio di domande. Se volete potete scriverle in chat, oppure anche, anzi meglio, accendere microfono e videocamera e chiedere.
Posso fare una domanda?
Certo.
Attimo. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Professore, vorrei chiederle che all'inizio della lezione lei ha detto, se non ho capito male, che l'ibernazione potrebbe consentirci di andare in un mondo virtuale.
È stata usata nel cinema per questo.
Non avevo capito questo passaggio.
Direi che questo sarebbe al momento estremamente difficile. Quello che si chiama mind uploading è, penso, ancora nella nuvola delle possibilità della fantascienza, ma non troppo della scienza.
Va bene. Grazie.
Prego. Va bene, io se non ci sono altre domande vi ho rubato anche un po' più di tempo, quindi... No, ce n'è una. Prego.
Io avrei una...
Sì, prego, prego.
Buongiorno, so che non è proprio collegato alla lezione di oggi, ma volevo chiedere qualche spiegazione sulla crioterapia, quindi il fatto che tanti sportivi la
Sì.
usano e quali possono essere i benefici e i problemi che possono emergere se si abusasse di questa terapia, perché non ho mai capito molto bene.
La crioterapia nasce per gli sportivi professionisti per migliorare la performance di picco della prestazione. Perché? Perché la fatica viene percepita dal cervello sotto forma di calore, nel senso che il cervello si scalda e a un certo punto si scalda abbastanza e dice basta. Okay? Questo limite non è un limite assoluto, si possono fare degli esperimenti in cui per esempio si mettono degli animali a correre su un tapis queste corrono, per esempio le pecore fanno così, corrono ad oltranza, gli piace, vanno finché non finiscono, non si fermano proprio perché per exhaustion. Ma se ci sono dei trucchi per raffreddare il cervello, quando si fermano per esaurimento, se si raffredda il cervello riprendono a correre, solo il cervello. E quindi cosa fanno gli sportivi professionisti? Fanno la crio prima della performance e così partono dalla temperatura corporea più bassa e quindi hanno un rango di crescita maggiore e quindi possono fare una performance più elevata, che tra l'altro dura lo stesso dell'altra ma ha un picco maggiore. Chi la usa dopo, sugli effetti dopo non c'è ancora una parola chiave. Ci sono ipotesi che abbia un effetto antinfiammatorio che possa aiutare, soprattutto a livello articolare, dove l'infiammazione è a volte difficile da trattare, però non ci sono evidenze, direi, incontrovertibili che questo funzioni. Il freddo ha sicuramente un effetto anestetico, quindi è assolutamente possibile che riduca la percezione del dolore ma non l'infiammazione. Quindi sul dopo così. Sul prima c'è efficacia, a lungo termine cosa succede? Non lo sa nessuno perché è da breve termine che si fa, cioè alcuni anni, quindi sono le esposizioni brevi di 2-3 minuti, a meno 80. Però cosa succede se uno lo fa per 50 anni non si sa ancora al momento. Secondo me probabilmente niente. Però.
Va bene, grazie mille.
Prego.
Allora, visto che sono le 9:45, chi
Sì.
deve andare nell'altra lezione è giustificato, anzi dovrebbe uscire. Mi raccomando, prima scrivete la presenza, presente, 2 punti, nome e cognome. Avevo visto che ci sono anche altre 2 persone, tra cui Patrick Turicelli, che avevo notato che volevano fare delle domande. Se non dovete partecipare all'altra lezione, secondo me il professore potrebbe rispondere.
Magari è una cosa velocissima.
Sì, cioè una curiosità più che altro.
Certo.
Cioè, volevo sapere attualmente quali sono magari alcune concrete e utili applicazioni per quanto riguarda insomma il campo dell'ibernazione, cioè a che punto siamo?
Siamo al punto di poterla indurre in animali che non ci vanno, ovviamente da qui a usarla sull'uomo c'è ancora molta strada da fare. A livello animale potenzialmente le applicazioni sono più vicine, anche se anche questo richiede molto lavoro. Per esempio un collega della NASA l'aveva suggerito come metodo per mandare gli animali nello spazio. Allora, tu immagina che anche solo animali da esperimento, come potrebbero essere topi o ratti, immagina che lanciare un animale nello spazio è una cosa estremamente stressante per l'animale, perché non si rende conto di quello che sta succedendo, l'accelerazione, il rumore, il calore, c'è tutta una cosa. E quindi sarebbe il mezzo ideale di spedirli. Tu li mandi in ibernazione sulla Terra, te li metti nelle tue cellette, nelle capsule, li lanci sulla Luna e poi sulla Luna inizi ad avere la colonia di animali per i tuoi studi. Queste potrebbero essere alcune applicazioni più prossime, che sarebbe comunque utile riuscire a raggiungere perché questo consentirebbe di sviluppare la tecnologia anche per l'uso umano successivo. Dopodiché, una volta che questo effettivamente fosse fattibile, le applicazioni umane sono estremamente ampie, arrivano tutti i casi in cui è utile ridurre il metabolismo, shock settico per esempio, patologie rare ma letali come lo status epilepticus, o anche più comuni come potrebbe essere semplicemente l'ictus o l'arresto cardiaco, ma anche altre, il tumore trattato in radioterapia per esempio potrebbe aumentare la protezione delle cellule sane al danno delle radiazioni, potrebbe consentire di usare una radioterapia più efficace, persone in attesa di trapianto che potrebbero prolungare la loro esistenza abbassando il loro metabolismo. Ogni giorno ne muoiono circa 20 fra Europa e Stati Uniti, no, di più 40 fra Europa e Stati Uniti, perché non ci sono organi, sono in lista d'attesa, ma manca l'organo da trapiantare. O così come migliorare la preservazione degli organi stessi nei donatori. Quindi le applicazioni sono tantissime. Il cervello diciamo, va incontro a cambiamenti radicali che avrebbero qualcosa di molto importante relativo alla malattia di Alzheimer. Adesso questo entreremo in molti dettagli molecolari, ma diciamo, le possibilità sono davvero molte, quindi per questo vale un po' la pena proseguire. Spero di aver dato una risposta.
Quindi sì, no, grazie. Cioè, per quanto riguarda, cioè, al di là dell'ambito della ricerca, cioè, quali potrebbero essere invece, cioè, magari occupazioni per quanto riguarda l'ambito lavorativo?
Qui è una cosa in effetti di cui pensare. La specialità medica a cui si riferisce, diciamo, più si avvicina è l'anestesia e rianimazione, quindi se sono gli anestesisti che si occupano di quello che oggi si chiama target temperature management, cioè di controllare l'ipotermia terapeutica, quindi nel momento in cui la tecnologia per il torpore sintetico umano esistesse concretamente, saranno probabilmente gli anestesisti ad averne le chiavi d'accesso. Ecco, non credo che questo svilupperà una nuova specialità, cioè un nuovo gruppo di persone che possa fare solo questo. Però potrebbe anche essere, ecco, questo è tutto da costruire.
Perfetto, grazie mille.
Grazie a voi.
Posso fare una domanda?
Prego.
Lei ha parlato, no, della hibernation, no? Quindi di tutti quei tipi di animali che inibiscono le loro funzioni vitali per poter sopportare l'inverno, giusto?
Sì, in realtà anche l'estate, per esempio in Madagascar nella stagione secca i lemuri vanno in ibernazione, si chiama estivazione in questo caso, che non c'hanno acqua.
Vabbè, comunque delle situazioni in cui sarebbe difficile sopravvivere altrimenti.
Certo, sì, corretto.
Io avevo letto in un articolo tempo fa, quindi questa informazione potrebbe essere sbagliata perché l'avevo letta un po' fa, che noi usiamo all'incirca soltanto il 30% delle nostre facoltà cerebrali complete. Cioè usiamo una minima parte del nostro cervello in realtà.
Questa è una leggenda che diciamo così, si ritrova sempre più frequentemente, non muore mai. Qualche volta è il 10%, qualche volta è il 3%. Allora, è una cosa... Noi usiamo sempre il 100% delle nostre capacità cerebrali per quello che ci serve in quel momento. Il cervello non è un organo da solo, è un organo strano in questo senso, perché è come se fossero tanti cervelli, uno dentro l'altro, sovrapposti in qualche modo. Ci sono circuiti neuronali che noi non attiviamo sempre. No, adesso noi stiamo parlando e stiamo seduti, d'accordo? Quindi non stai usando, per esempio, quella parte di cervello che serve per gustare, per assaggiare i gusti e per codificare i gusti. E in questo momento è a riposo, perché tu non stai mangiando niente. Questo non vuol dire che tu non la stia usando, è sempre lì. Adesso poi magari vai a pranzo e invece la attiverai, però mentre attivi il gusto non attiverai quei circuiti che, non so, ti fanno nuotare, perché il controllo motore del nuoto è diverso. Allora, il cervello è una macchina che è fatta di tante macchine specializzate per fare qualcosa. Ecco, non è poi neanche esattamente così, però giusto per farvi capire. Quindi in un certo senso è vero che noi usiamo sempre una frazione del nostro cervello, ma non è neanche possibile usarlo tutto. Se tu lo usassi tutto contemporaneamente, probabilmente andresti incontro a un attacco epilettico massiccio. E in alcuni casi potresti morire. Cioè, noi per esempio non attiviamo normalmente il circuito che risponde all'ipossia, perché non siamo in ipossia, che potrebbe fermare il cuore però potenzialmente. Quindi se tutto il cervello si attivasse, questo vuol dire che noi moriremmo. E noi attiviamo sempre la quantità di cervello che è necessaria a fare il meglio che possiamo in quell'ambiente dove siamo. Questo è per darti un po' una visione di cos'è l'attività cerebrale.
E allora la mia domanda non ha senso, ok?
No, per esempio, quando dormi, il tuo cervello è ancora attivo. Cioè, tu ne usi una grandissima quantità, addirittura nel sonno-REM ancora di più di quando sei sveglia, però non sei sveglia, quindi lo stai comunque usando paradossalmente nel momento in cui ti sembrerebbe di usarne meno possibile.
Però ad esempio, no? Adesso che ha parlato dello stare a dormire, per accedere al subconscio, no? Noi a livello conscio non accediamo al subconscio, se no non sarebbe subconscio. E quindi comunque è impedito questo accesso. non si potrebbe usare ad esempio il freddo per inibire alcune funzioni del corpo in modo tale che il cervello possa concentrarsi più sul subconscio per permetterci un accesso? Non so se abbia senso come cosa.
Cioè tu vorresti dire, se io tolgo al cervello dell'impegno, può darsi che lui possa usare, poi quando dici cervello stai dicendo coscienza e self-consciousness, in modo che io possa concentrarmi su me stesso e accedere a quelle informazioni. In termini medici, subconscio vuol dire che è subconscio, cioè resta subconscio, quindi vuol dire che non ha mezzi di accedere a un'informazione cosciente. Ovviamente in termini analitici tu potresti dire che ci sono concetti o esperienze che attivamente tu preferisci non ricordare o che non facciano parte del tuo vissuto cosciente, e questo ti porta su una strada però analitica, quindi diciamo così, che ha proprio una base strutturale e culturale diversa da quella scientifica, perché in psicanalisi non si possono fare esperimenti. Si potrebbe provare, ecco, un giorno che si possa fare, ci sono dei modi di fare raffreddamenti selettivi cerebrali. Secondo me quello che ottieni è ridurre semplicemente la quantità di coscienza che il cervello può processare, quindi raffreddare una parte selettiva del cervello è come anestetizzarla, e quindi vuol dire togliere dei pezzi. E adesso al momento non sappiamo com'è effettivamente, dov'è il nucleo, diciamo così, o il motivo che ci dà autocoscienza, quindi sarebbe anche difficile indirizzarlo verso un aumento o un perfezionamento del suo funzionamento. Però potrebbe essere un'idea interessante. Ecco.
Grazie.
Prego. Mi sa che vi ho rubato un sacco di tempo, quindi non vorrei essere un ospite che poi non sono passati 3 giorni, però insomma.
Sì, no, però questa stanza è libera fino alle 10:30. Quindi
a posto, perfetto.
è l'altra stanza che adesso...
Va bene.
Però se non ci sono altre domande...
Benissimo.
Interventi, qualunque cosa, direi che siamo anche a posto. Perfetto, quindi ringrazio tutti i partecipanti, spero vi possiate divertire. Venite oggi pomeriggio allo stand del collegio, alla stanza virtuale del collegio d'orientamento, e ringrazio di nuovo il professor Cerri per aver dato la sua disponibilità, soprattutto in questo periodo le date non sono proprio...
No, non è un problema, non è un problema. Grazie a voi, in bocca al lupo a tutti allora.
Grazie.
Arrivederci, salve.